Hi, it's Davina. We're in my kitchen again. I am donning my Department of Defense Against the Dark Arts t-shirt. And I am not done trying to fix that raspberry cake that you may have seen in an earlier episode. The difference between cake, brownies, and cookies is really only a matter of proportions. They've got the same stuff in them. They've got butter, sugar, flour, and leavening, usually baking powder. And how you readjust those is the difference between whether you're going to have a crispy cookie, a chewy brownie bar, or a fluffy cake. I'm going to take the disaster raspberry cake and change it into being a cookie. It'll probably be closer to a chewy brownie cookie rather than a crisp snapping cookie, but this is just another way of changing things up. Now, a lot of people say, do not mess around when you are baking. Cooking, you can do substitutions and fusions and things like that, and you can mess around with stuff and it'll, work out usually. But with baking, it's more like a science, and you've got to have weights and measures and proportions and temperatures just right for it to end up perfect. That's true for yeast breads. A lot of the chewy, glutinous breads and such like that, yes. But when we're talking about quick breads, such as scones, muffins, brownies, cookies, and many cakes, they are less fussy. You may have noticed that some cake box recipes will say, hey, if you don't want to use butter, if you want to make this a fat-free cake, you can substitute in applesauce. That's a big difference between macerated apples and butterfat. Those are very chemically different, they're very texturally different, and yet, you see that on box cakes, and your cake will still turn out as a cake. So when it comes to the quick breads, you actually do have some room to mess around. So the primary ingredients of cookies, cakes, and brownies is flour, sugar, butter, and baking powder. Usually more flour than sugar, usually more sugar than butter, usually more butter than baking powder. And that's pretty much it. Whether you want to add in a little bit of salt, because the combination of salt and sugar is a good combo, okay, maybe a little dash of salt. Do you add in eggs? Sometimes they'll add a richness to your baked good, but they're not necessary. Nuts and chocolates and things like that, that's all fillings and flavorings and stuff. These are the primary ingredients. Now, there's recipes out there for how to make breadcrumbs into cookies, how to make crackers, matzo crackers, or saltine crackers into cookies. These ingredients mostly stay, but because I'm using a sweet cake, I'm not going to add sugar. I already have plenty of this in the cake leftovers, so I'm not going to fuss about adding in more sugar. In fact, if anything, if I did add in more sugar, it would just make it way too sweet. And I believe you can have stuff too sweet. Some people might argue with me, but trust me, sometimes you can cut out some sugar. Now, I did a bunch of research before jumping into this one, and I was looking up breadcrumb, cake crumb, and cracker crumb cookies. They all had slightly different proportions, but I averaged them out to figure out what would make crumbs bind together to make new cookies. Now, some recipes, like the matzo cracker cookies that I found, do not add in any extra flour, but quite a number of them do. So I'm going to go through those proportions. But if you are trying to do something that is kosher for Passover and you're using all matzah crackers, just substitute matzah crackers for the flour portion of this. So let's say you've got 3 cups of breadcrumbs, cake crumbs, cracker crumbs. Very fine. Put it in a food processor to make sure that it's really, really crumbled up. Then you're going to want 1 stick of butter or about a half cup of shortening. Let's get back to that in a second because I want to talk about frosting. You're going to want to have 1 cup sugar or 1/2 cup white and 1/2 cup brown sugar. If you're looking for a more vanilla-y, molassesy cookie, you're going to want that brown sugar in it. If you're trying to go for something more like a sweet sugar cookie, just stick with the white sugar. You're going to want to have 1 egg. Now, if the original cookies didn't have an egg, that's all right. But the egg is going to be like a binding agent. It's like adding an egg to the mix for your meatballs. You want to have that as something to hold the stuff together. You're going to add in a pinch of salt. You're going to want 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. That's going to make the cookie fluffier instead of super dense and hard. And then another 1.5 cups of flour. That flour mixed with the egg liquid and the other things will rebake and help form it together. Now again, if you're doing this all matzah cracker or matzah meal, you can just put in like 1 more cup of matzah meal and that'll be fine. So if you don't have any flour but you got a ton of crumbs, you can totally skip adding the flour. That's not going to be a problem. Remember, this is an amalgamation of a bunch of recipes. So, do I have to add in all that sugar and the butter? Not if you have frosting, because the average frosting is about 1.5 cups of shortening or butter, 2 pounds of confectioner sugar, 4 tablespoons water, and 1.5 teaspoons vanilla. So, the leftover frosting that I had from the cake and whatever frosting was still in my crumbled cake, they usually recommend that you scrape it off if you're making cookies, but scrape it off and measure it, and if it's the right proportions for that 1/2 cup of butter, use that instead and then cut down or cut out the extra sugar altogether. It will bake in and it'll do the thing. Now, confectioner's sugar does have some cornstarch in it. That's another binding agent. So it's already going to have thickeners and binding agents. And, you know, some people don't like eggs. Well, you can use other binding agents besides eggs in your cookies. I just think eggs make it easy. So I'm now going to totally experiment and make up a new cookie out of that raspberry cake disaster. Something that I did do is, because it was a cake and ice cream cake mix with a raspberry gel in it, I just let it all defrost and mixed it up. I've got chunks of white chocolate in it. I'm gonna add additional bits of white chocolate. I'm gonna add some almonds to it, as well as the flour and the shortening based frosting. I'm gonna add a little bit of lemon because I think that tartness of the lemon is going to kind of enhance the raspberryness. And a little bit of salt, baking soda, flour. That's it. So enjoy the magical transformation. All right, I've got it all mixed up, and I ended up adding in a bit more flour because it seemed a bit loose. That's probably because I had melted ice cream in my cake and that raspberry filling stuff. So I think that's going to be okay. I could have also probably, because I had the other liquids, skipped the eggs because there was already thickening agents in the raspberry. So right now I have the dough, the cookie dough, hanging out in the refrigerator, chilling down. Hopefully that'll help stiffen it up. Now I like to use parchment paper on my cookie sheets because it makes popping the cookies off the cookie sheets so much easier. Don't need to worry about non-stick or anything. You can just take them, shift them off, and then, reuse the parchment paper for several batches of cookies, and that seems to work out well for me. So no more video until that dough has chilled. With cleanup time, setup time, and mixing together and everything, it's been about 45 minutes. So I'm gonna give that another half hour in the refrigerator, and then we'll be back to baking. These are the cookies. They didn't spread out like I expected them to, but they are soft on the inside, so they're more of a sort of scone or cake-like cookie. And they are delicious. A little bit of raspberry, a little bit of white chocolate, a little bit of almond to it. Pretty good. Took me 3 batches in the oven, 12 minutes at 350 degrees. So these are my remade raspberry, white chocolate, and almond cookies out of a raspberry cake. They're nice and squishy. They're a chewy cookie instead of a crispy cookie. And I think they turned out well. Thank you for joining me on this real-time cooking. This took about, I want to say, 2 hours if you want to do the cooling of the dough and the baking of the cookies. So if you're going to have a cake disaster and you want to try to change it into something else, cookies is a good bet.